Hi, I'm Steve Chernosky, and this is Tap Into You, a podcast on local and regional issues. And this is a brand new segment called Take Me to Your Leader. Today I'm with Jeff Doshna, a professional planner, economist, and a former councilman, and is currently the chair of the Flemington Planning Board. Welcome, Jeff, and can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you ended up in Flemington Borough?
Thanks, Steve. I've lived in Flemington since 1996. I moved to New Jersey with my late wife when we graduated college. She had a job working in the pharmaceutical industry, and I was starting grad school at Rutgers. And we found Flemington, and it's a great town. And we've been here ever since. Yeah, I've raised my kids here, and this is I've lived on Main Street that whole time, first in an apartment and then in a house. And Yeah, I mean it's just a great town. So I've been here for coming on 25 years.
Wow, and you're also a professor, correct, at Temple?
I am. I'm the program head for our programs in community development and in city and regional planning. It's part of the Temple University. It's the Tyler School of Art and Architecture. So it's a little bit of a commute,
Yeah,
but
it's good.
but honestly, I take the train in, and it's a great
Wow.
train ride in from West Trenton, and I get some work done. I don't want to leave Flemington. I like living here, so you put up with a little bit of a commute.
So how does what kind of got your interest in architecture and planning and in local economics? Where did the interest come from? Like, was it from a young age, or where'd you get? Okay, so
Yeah, it's definitely not a young age. One of the problems about planning is that no little kid grows up and says they want to be a city planner.
right.
It's and even in high school, we find across the industry that it's not the kind of thing that inspires guidance counselors to help kids go towards that. I started off as a poli sci major. Where I went to
Okay.
undergrad, and I kind of was interested in urban politics, and I ended up doing a major in economics because it seemed to be a little bit more of interest once I got into college. And then I started taking classes in the geography department at Hopkins, and had some really interesting professors, and talking to them about what would happen after, what I should do after school. One of them said to me, "You're not a geographer, you're sort of an economist, but you're a planner, because you look at the
Hmm.
interdisciplinary uh, connections of things. You like to see action. You like to see things get done. You're not a theaterist. You're not a theoretical type person. You're more interested in seeing something get built and get done." And so then, of course, I had to figure out what planning was. So I was probably a junior in college, maybe even my senior. You follow my senior year, and I kind of figured out that, yeah, this is exactly who I am and what I want to do. I applied to a couple of grad schools, went to, and ended up going to Rutgers, and that's how I got, moved up here to Flemington. So it's not something that most people think of, at a young age. It turns out my brother is an architect by training, and so it's funny that we've kind of got these, you know, in the same family. Neither one of
Hmm.
our parents went to college. Not, they were not professionals at all. My dad worked retail his whole life. My mom, worked as a bookkeeper for years and years. So it's not like we had this kind of example, right, of that kind of. But that we both ended up in the built environment stuff, which is kind of interesting.
There's got to be something, back down. Really resonated when you said that there was something, you didn't even know this was a possible major. Like when I think of public policy, I never had a guidance counselor say this is something you can do as a career. But I do look back and like visiting my grandparents in Highland Park, Illinois, a suburb of Chicago, and
Sure.
just being able to walk in a downtown.
Yep.
And that really like resonated. Was there something with? I mean, did you build a lot of Legos when you were a kid? Like
Well, we were more of a Lincoln Logs and a Bristol Blocks
there
kind
you
of
go.
house as opposed to Legos. But what's fun looking back at it now with the lens of having gone through a master's and a PhD and been teaching for 20 years, I realized I grew up in a kind of in a Levittown. I grew up in a
Mhm.
um, uh, that kind of built in the 1950s suburb on Long Island,
Yes.
and one of these houses that were built post World War II, tract development. I now know the history of of redlining and racial
Yes.
segregation and all the
Yes.
discrimination that was built into federal law. I know all of these things now, right? Looking back at it, but I kind of grew up in that environment in the 80s, and that was uh, certainly formative. I was born in Brooklyn, but I grew up on Long Island. My parents, it was better schools, and
Yeah.
now again, looking back at that, I'm thinking of all of the education crisis and funding in New York City in the 70s, and like all of these things, you kind of look back at and you see how it probably was formative, but at the time you don't necessarily
Yeah.
are aware of it. I've always cared about the politics of it, and I've been involved in local politics for not only here in Flemington for a long time, but my generationally, my great grandfather was part of like the Brooklyn Democratic machine, and my grandmother was a poll worker until she was in her 80s. Like there's um, stuffing envelopes was always just kind of what you did, and so looking at how power happens, looking at how these processes fall out, that I think was part of how I grew up. We were always engaged. We always read the newspaper. You always knew what was going on, and so doing service, being part, giving back to the community was always kind of how we lived. And so that's the I think that kind of gets baked in at an early age. That looking at not just what's going on with you in your household, but looking at the neighborhood you live in, looking at the community that you live in.
And so let's talk about that community that you live in. Flemington is a nice compact borough. And what are some of the news going before the planning board right now? Like I'm thinking of, you have Courthouse Square recently approved by council. Besides that, is there anything of news going on right now in the borough?
Well, right now we've got a meeting coming up this coming week. We've got there's two things on the agenda that are substantive. There's the Courthouse Square, and they have their site plan review. Um, Council did their part, and now it lies with the planning board to judge the application against the approved redevelopment plan, and that'll proceed, as it moves forward. The other one, the application we've got right now is a proposal at 91 Main Street. That's Lee Roth's law office.
Oh,
That's those are two that are on the agenda right now. Um, don't want to talk too much about particulars, just to
right.
kind of keep everything above board. There are other things that are going on right now with planning board that I think are important. Last year, council asked the planning board to do a study looking at the Liberty Village site to determine whether or not it meets the statutory requirements of an area in need of redevelopment. And I think that work is ongoing, and we'll probably have some drafts of that study in the next couple of months, and we'll be able to take a look at that. And it's a huge piece
Yeah.
of real estate in town. It's 25 or so acres. Liberty Village, when it was first built, was transformative for Flemington and Hunterdon County, and I think that it could again very well be. That site could certainly have impact, but there's concerns there. It's there's wetlands and environmental hazards, as well as
Hmm.
highway access and all sorts of interesting things. So it's a site with great potential. So I think that that's something that's worth looking at. The, the other issue that's going on right now is by state law, we're required to update our comprehensive master plan every 10 years. And so we are, it was supposed to happen last year, but COVID kind of put a pause on some of those things, and that's fine. But it's going to happen this year. We're going to move forward with looking comprehensively at what needs to happen in town. And I think that Flemington Borough has had a lot of studies done and a lot of public engagement. And I think now it's time for us to take all of that good participation that's happened and, pull it all together and think about what we want to see happen um, going forward for the next, not just the short term, right? Comprehensive plans are meant to be documents that exist for decades and set out a long-term vision. And I think that we all agree that, compact, walkable, sustainable downtown is where Flemington's strength is. We've got wonderful historic architecture. We've got a wonderful town that you could walk to everything. It's one of the reasons why we moved here, right? One of the reasons I moved here 25 years ago was that it was a place where we wanted to raise a family. It was a place where I knew that we could walk up to a restaurant. It was a place where my kids could walk to the library, and do all that kind of great stuff. And I think that's our strength. I think that's and building on that is going to be key. Obviously, Courthouse Square is a substantial project and will be certainly impactful going forward. But there are other redevelopment projects in the works. There's both parts of the Agway site that is kind of working its way through. So I really do think that there's some really great stuff that's going to happen here in town.
So am I correct that Liberty Village is the oldest outdoor outlets? Is that like
My
one of the first?
understanding is it was the first factory outlet built in the U.S. I believe that is true. It's certainly, I mean, and I don't think I'm speaking out of turn here. It's certainly well past its prime, and it's certainly well past the destination retail model. Is certainly uses much larger sites than what we have here. I mean, if you think about other ones, even in New Jersey, like in Jackson, you know, that's a much larger piece of property, and it's certainly, you know, not. And you know, then the question is whether or not people shop in that way anymore. What we're finding is that people still crave retail in-person experiences, but what they're looking for is that walkable downtown. They're craving that shop that they could go in and talk to the owner. And if it's a big box kind of purchase, they're doing that online, and they're doing it at different kind of stores, right? So people that experience of retail, of walking through a downtown, of stopping in several shops, of going out and grabbing food or coffee or whatever. We've got that. Like, Flemington's primed for this kind of experience. We just have to, you know, take the next couple of steps, I think. So I think that Liberty Village is a place where we can reincorporate some of that going forward, you know, rather than just this kind of big monolithic block. I think we can be creative there.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if the state makes any some of the changes in laws they've done to aid restaurants and other businesses during the pandemic permanent. Like, I think when I live in Lambertville, so it's quick over the bridge to Pennsylvania, and I go to La Hosca over there and the shops, you know, at Peddler's Village, and residents, I should say, shoppers are allowed to take a drink outdoors and walk around and shop. Yeah. And like, so, and I say this because of course you have Lone Eagle expanding right as I'd almost call it an anchor of that in a way. And it'd be very interesting to see like what changes, you know, could be made anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think that anyone who's serious about this could defend the current liquor control laws in New Jersey. Everyone agrees that they were written in the 50s and 60s. There definitely needs to be some modernization. I think that towns have become very creative in figuring out ways to work within the existing rules. So you mentioned Lone Eagle, great business. I love Lone Eagle. Like, they're a brewery. They're not a bar, right? And so it's a manufacturing site, and there are rules in which allow them to do what they can do. But the state rules that kind of say that your liquor licenses for serving is based on population, you know, creates this kind of artificial market that makes them very expensive, and they're limited in number, right? And you know, I think that certainly is something that needs to get fixed in some way. The fact that you know, I think that we've been fairly creative trying to figure out a way to make this work, and I think that there's some ability, you know, kind of the local municipal level to make some of those changes, but a lot of this has got to come out of Trenton, and I know that there are some bills trying to work their way through to update and modernize the you know, ABC rules, because I think that there is some room there. I don't even think it needs to be the ability to walk and carry your beer from store to store, but I just think that the ability to have more places able to serve wine with dinner, you know, kind of things, and that, you know, the restaurants, you know, I grew up in New York, and the idea that you have to kind of bring your bottle of wine along with you to go to dinner is a very Jersey thing. You know, it's very much, and you get used to it, right? But it's kind of weird if you think about it. And you know, and Pennsylvania is not necessarily the model. I mean, Pennsylvania has state stores. You can't buy alcohol or wine except a store that's owned and run by the state. Maybe that's not the right way to do that, right? So I think that there's some good models in other parts of the country too. But certainly allowing restaurants to serve, you know, beer and wine if they're above a certain size, I think that those kinds of things make sense.
And Courthouse Square, I'm going back to that really quickly. That, you know, we have nearby in Stockton, the Stockton Inn. Yep. I just wrote an article on that. There's a lot of people like, very nervous that this is going to turn into like some mega site on an old historic inn.
Hmm.
And a lot of people have cited Courthouse Square as kind of like a model compromise. Like, do you see it that way? Do you see that? Look, there was pushback to the Cusp project there, but like, do you see that this as like a win for a lot of people, a really good example of a compromise?
Well, I mean, let me be careful here because there is
Right.
a pending application for the
Still,
planning board.
okay.
I will tell you that I was not 100% in favor of the original design that was approved. I thought it was too big. I thought that the scale was not right. I am very happy to see that there was good constructive conversation between the mayor and council, the current mayor and council, I should say. Uh, and really, and when I was on council, I was on that redevelopment committee with Caitlin Giles McCormick and Mayor Driver. And I think that we were able to start, I mean, at least when I was on council, we were able to start a conversation towards finding something that was a bit more appropriate for everybody. And I do think that it is a huge project, just
Yeah.
it's a big piece of town, it's centerpiece, it is a focal point of historic architecture and buildings in town. So it has to be handled in a good way. But I also know that I've been around long enough on the planning board that this is not, we've been working on this site for a decade,
Yeah.
and through a couple of attempts of other redevelopers it didn't work out. Clearly, Jack Hust and his team are committed to this project and committed to building something, and seem to be willing to talk it, and figure out those compromises. So it could be, I don't say model. It's hard to say that because every town's got its own context. Every town's got its own, peculiar things, its own history. Flemington's the county seat. Flemington
Mm.
has a large percentage of properties that are tax exempt. And so it really becomes really critical
Yeah.
to make sure that we've got enough business ratables in town to balance out the residential burden. And so that it's not all just on homeowners to pay the kind of necessary and essential things like snowplows to get done. So having a good having good development in town, that's appropriate for the historical context, that is a destination because we are the county seat. All of those things matter, right? And I think that you're not going to see a development like this in Stockton because it's just not appropriate to the size and scale of Stockton, right? It's this, but there are ways to make it work. I also think that one of the things that I'm going to enjoy once that whole site is done, is the ability just to walk and get to a place, and not have to worry about driving to go out and have. I try to patronize as many borough businesses as possible, but right now, if you want to get other than going to Lone Eagle, if you want to go to a place for dinner and a drink kind of thing, it's not as easy as it could be, right? So I'm looking forward to that and other projects that are, I think, kind of waiting to see how that gets done. There are other sites along Main Street that I think that are kind of waiting. So
That's a big deal. The county seat and the amount of land that's not taxed. Like Trenton has a huge problem. I mean, as the state capital, just a huge problem as a city trying to pull itself out. Just there's not, as you said, there's not a whole lot of ratables. But I guess when I think of Flemington, I had heard, I know New Jersey Transit's in a difficult situation. Do you see any potential future for a rail link to the Raritan line on NJ Transit train?
I would love for it to be there. As somebody who takes the train to Philly, I would love to have an NJ Transit option in Flemington. If I'm being entirely honest with you, I think that while Flemington is on the long range plan documents for NJ Transit right
Yes.
now, it's long range, and I think that for us to realistically expect that there's going to be rail service, connecting, say, Lambertville, Flemington, up through to, say, into Boundbrook or somewhere on the Raritan line. I would love to see it happen. I believe that I think that we need to make more investment in transit systems overall. I think from an environmental perspective, if we can get people to get out of their cars a little bit, especially if we're talking about commuting to work, I think it's just better all around. However, rail may not be the right way to do that. And I think that there have been some really interesting examples of bus service, because you don't need to make the same kind of investment in infrastructure
Right.
as you would for rail. Um, and I know that not everyone thinks of bus service the same way, but if we were to have bus service that ran on the same frequency as a train, running up 202, connecting Lambertville and Ringo's and Flemington and, all the way up to the train station, and it was running very frequently, even if it was its own dedicated lane, coming up the middle of 202. I think we could accomplish the same kind of transit goals without having to wait for the $1 billion investment that it would take for it to happen. So um, I think that there's a transit option that connect Flemington to New York that's not, say, Transbridge. That there's better
Right.
ways to do that, but I don't. I think that there's other ways to do it. The other thing, honestly, is we may see autonomous vehicles playing a larger role, and we may see, those other things playing a role. So I don't know, as much as I'm not a transportation planner. I just kind of know a little bit, but I do think that um, I think there's options here for Flemington that if we're creative about, it doesn't have to just be rail. There are other ways which we could think through.
All right. Hey, well, thank you so much for being here and doing this. And I'm Steve Chernosky, and this is Tap Into You, a podcast on local and regional issues. And this has been a brand new segment called Take Me to Your Leader. My guest today has been Jeff Doshna. Jeff, thank you very much again for being here.
My pleasure, Steve.